Hey, so that last video format was much easier for me to upload, and I felt like I was explaining a little bit better. I think the visuals will help, especially as we move into today's subject, which is shoulder girdle anatomy, just movement and stuff. So, first off, the girdle isn't just about your giant cannonball deltoids and bench press numbers. It's this biomechanical masterpiece. It's one of the most unique, bony shapes we have in the body, the shoulder blades. And it helps us have a little bit more freedom, speed, and power with our upper extremity movements. We're going to dive deep into the bony and muscular anatomy of the shoulder girdle, looking through the lens of kinesiology, biomechanics, and arthrokinematics. So, shoulder girdle refers to the collective structures that connect the upper limb to the axial skeleton, including our clavicle, the scapula, the proximal humerus, and all the joints, ligaments, and muscles that hold them together. Functionally, we break this region down into four joints. We have our SC joint, which is our sternoclavicular joint, a acromioclavicular joint, our AC joint, and scapulothoracic articulation, which is not like a true synovial joint, but it's functionally essential, and our glenohumeral joint, which we'll cover separately on its own in another video. We might mention it briefly here. All these are going to contribute to our chain of motion that allows the arm to move through an incredible range while maintaining joint congruency, muscular balance, and stability. So let's start with bony anatomy. The clavicle acts as a strut between the sternum and the scapula. So this is our sternum, and then boop, there's our little clavicle buddy, right? It maintains the shoulder width and allows the scapula to glide over the thoracic cage. Scapula is a flat triangular bone that floats over the posterior ribs, and it provides attachment points for 17 different muscles and moves in 3D space through upward and downward rotation, protraction, retraction, elevated pressure. Now, there's only certain muscles that we're concerned with in the shoulder girdle specifically. There's, 17 different, attachment points, but uh, the shoulder girdle itself isn't just those. There are muscles that are more to do with the glenohumeral joint than the actual shoulder girdle. And our humerus interacts with the scapula, the glenohumeral joint. We covered that. Um, oh, fun fact: the head of the humerus is about twice the size of the glenoid fossa, which is going to give us a lot of mobility. But it makes stability a muscular and ligamentous job rather than a bony job, right? It's a ball and socket joint, which is very similar to our hip, but with much more mobility. So the sternum is going to complete our bony chain by anchoring the clavicle medially at the manubrium. These bones are going to create our scaffold, but the muscles, ligaments, and joint capsules are what's going to give us our dynamic stability, right? Let's get past that. We're not concerned with the humeral joint. So we have our AC and SC joints. Scapulothoracic joint is not a true joint, but it's the functional interface between the scapula and the thoracic cage. It glides along the ribs in three planes. We have elevation and depression. We have protraction and retract. Oh, I went blurry. And retraction. And then we have upward and downward rotation, which you can think of it just like doing this, which is going to happen when we move up and down like that, right? Motion of the scapula is essential for scapulohumeral rhythm, which is the coordinated movement between the humerus and the scapula. If you watched our video on upward and downward rotation, you understand why that is. Not upward. I've watched the video on roll and glide rules. You'll understand why that is. Because we're going to get to a certain point where even if we're rolling and gliding down, bam, that the humerus is going to run into the scapula. So it actually needs to roll. Oh, it needs to rotate in order to facilitate more movement, right? For every 2 degrees of shoulder abduction, the scapula rotates upward by 1 degree. Generally, unless you are deliberately stabilizing your scapula. So, for example, where you might do this is if you're doing a lateral raise. Some people like to do lateral raises where they set their scapula right in place and actually don't allow it to move. That way there's less trap involvement, right? Instead of rotating your scapula like this, you're doing your lateral raises where you're actually getting scapular movement versus lateral raises. Oh, knocked some over. where you're not getting very much scapular movement at all. Does that make sense? Uh, let's see. Lost my place there for a second. So basically, all that ratio of movement does is ensures that the glenoid stays aligned under the humeral head. Our AC joint and sternoclavicular joints allow the scapula to move with the clavicle. The SC joint is the only true joint connecting the upper limb to the axial skeleton, and that's kind of weird because you have, your humerus and your scapula right here, and then this is it, right? Connected to the axial skeleton. This sternoclavicular joint. Like that's how that the rest of your arm, that's all hinges on that. You break that, you get that piano key, piano towel presentation. If you ever injured that, I had a guy on my football team in middle school who got into a fight with another dude, and they decided to settle it by taking off their helmets and spearing each other, which was dumb, and he broke that joint. It was not smart at all. But the SC joint, only true joint, like I said, it's what's going to allow elevation and depression, protraction, retraction, and axial rotation, right? The AC joint, acromioclavicular joint, allows the scapula to fine-tune its position, and it's supported by the acromioclavicular and coracoclavicular ligaments. So we got a easy way to remember. This is going to become a problem. It's kind of a problem that comes back from your anatomy and physiology classes. You're going to have to remember the difference between coracoid and coronoid. And the stupid way that I remember that is that coracoid is around your collarbones and coronoid is around your nail bone. Uh, that's really dumb, but that's how I remember it. So then let's talk about the muscles a little bit. We can divide the musculature of the shoulder girdle into two broad categories. We have our scapular stabilizers. These muscles are going to move and stabilize the scapula. So we have your traps, which basically just look like this. You've seen traps before. They're the ones that make bodybuilders look like there's a slightly smaller man emerging from a bigger man. You know what I mean? And they're divided into three functional divisions. And here's the deal. It's a little bit weird. You have like this skinny little division of your traps that actually attaches to your clavicles, right? When we say upper, middle, lower, we're basically just, you can think about it in fiber direction. So these fibers tend to run up a little bit more. These tend to run a little bit more towards the center, and these tend to run downwards, right? But yeah, there's that little shrimpy kind. So like this is the upper traps, like this little area right there, like that's the upper traps. But the technical upper traps right there is this a little skinny division that's literally running uh like from up here to right here in your clavicle, right? Whether you want to differentiate that or not, it's up to you. Middle, that's going to be our scapular retraction, where we're pulling the shoulder blades closer together. When I cue people on rowing, I say think about squeezing a pencil in between your shoulder blades. That's your mid traps. And some people like semantics in the traps is like actually terrible. Some will only consider the upper traps, that skinny little division, and then the rest, the middle division. So they'll divide it middle traps as like from there to like there, right? I think that's a poor semantical division, delineation, but do whatever Professor Fordham tells you to. I think more functionality. If the division of the traps is more straight, it's going to aid more in retraction. If it's more vertical, it's going to aid more in elevation, right? I think that's a much better functional definition for the traps. Um, and then you have the lower traps, which is going to depress and upwardly rotate the scapula. So this is why there was this argument back in the day about people saying that overhead pressing grows your traps, and then some people are saying overhead pressing doesn't grow your traps, right? They were saying, well, you have to stabilize the scapula and, it'll grow your traps. And I was in the camp of that doesn't make any sense for a long time until I actually went through this class. And then I realized, oh, yeah, if you're doing a frontal plane press, your lower traps have to they have to contract hard to depress and upwardly rotate that scapula, right? Because if we look at where they connect on like an upper part of the scapula right here. They all insert right there. So any contraction on their part is going to pull the scapula up here, which is going to result in upward rotation, right? Because we think about like rotation is basically where this little point at the bottom of the scapula goes, right? But yeah, so it overhead pressing will grow your traps more so if it's closer to a vertical, frontal plane press right here where you're very upright. Um, so that's something to consider when you're programming stuff. Um, if somebody lacks shoulder mobility, they're probably gonna have weak lower traps, and that's something to consider. It's a case by case basis, but interesting to me. If you're interested in growing muscle, right, that's vertical presses should be in your program for that reason. They're gonna have you have a great, more thick upper back, right? Serratus anterior is the other muscle that's gonna protract the scapula, and it's gonna anchor it to the thoracic wall, which is important. You see people with wing scapulas. My father has wing scapulas. I don't. My sister does though. And they can kind of like kick their scapula out and like shoot it out from their back. I know my father's is just particularly weak. It's kind of a genetic thing too, but being able to protract that scapula is an important movement whenever we think about rowing. Some people, when they row, it's usually just because they aren't used to it, but being able to actively protract so you can move through a full range of motion is important. It's important for people like boxers who do a lot of punching like that, having a strong serratus anterior. What it's also important for is any sort of pressing or fly mechanics, because if we aren't keeping that scapula kind of close to the rib cage, that can cause some dysfunction in our scapulohumeral rhythm, and potentially some discomfort, as well as just leading towards more pec tears. Powerlifters tend to have very weak serratus anterior muscles, and the ones that address it tend to have greater longevity in the sport. It's also critical for upward rotation um, during an overhead motion, much like the lower traps. Then we have the levator scapulae and the rhomboids. They're going to elevate and downwardly rotate the scapula. That's just because of how they're shaped. So if we kind of draw them on this other side, I'll draw another scapula. The base that is so good, isn't it? Let me undo that. We'll just draw a little dude right here. Rhomboids. They're kind of shaped like this. So when they contract, they're going to contract in this direction. So they'll move the scapula upward, but they're also going to rotate it a little bit this way, right? Does that make sense? Pec minor, this is going to pull the scapula forward and down, and it will contribute to postural dysfunction if tight. But also, not a lot of people train their pec minor. You can do dips and push-ups and flies where you actually protract actively. And I've seen a lot of benefit with that in some of my clients. Again, we're just working that protraction. It's never going to really be a prime mover. It's there to, stabilize and stuff like that. But um, I think being able to move it through an effective range of motion is generally good for programming for your populations. We're not going to get too deep into the humeral joint. I want to focus really hard on the shoulder girdle. Sorry, my notes are a little bit different here. So let's see how it all. We can talk about the rotator cuff. Yeah, I'm gonna save rotator cuff and the other muscles more so for the next video. And we'll get to that, but I just want to close here by saying the shoulder girdle is very versatile and complex. Um, if we want to train it, protect it, and optimize it, we have to, understand these deep things. It's going to be very useful for those who are like me and are personal trainers or work with aging populations. The shoulder girdle is oftentimes a really complex thing to work. People aren't used to moving it forward and back and, kind of doing all sorts of movements with that shoulder girdle. It can be very limiting for some people as well who don't know how to properly expand the rib cage and keep the scapula moving, in a nice way. So I didn't want to make this just, a purely anatomy lesson here, and I hope it wasn't. And I hope this kind of maybe I said something a little bit different than Dr. Fordham, and it helped you out. But yeah, see you in the next one.
So now we're going to take a look at the acromioclavicular joint, and we're going to get some goop. Can you expose your collarbone there, Tristan? Yeah, there you go. Goop it up. All right. So Tristan is going to sit with his right hand up on his palm. So just sit palm up right there, rest it on your thigh. And I'm going to come in right here. And we are going to reduce the depth a little bit. We don't need to be that deep. Let's see if we can find the acromioclavicular joint. Right there. Okay, so you can see those two structures. On the left side there, we have the acromion, and on the right side, we have the clavicle. So, Tristan, if you move your arm, well, kind of like your shoulder in a cross chest motion, like you're trying to slowly, yep, and then back, and then shrug your shoulders. Yep, you can kind of see it articulate there. Yep. And now if I move back this way, if you look over top the acromion right there, we have the subscapularis tendon. No, we have the, excuse me, we have, if you look over top the acromion right there, on the left side, we have the supraspinatus tendon, right? And shrug your shoulder again. See, look at it contract right there. And relax. Good. All right, that's AC joint. All right, now we're gonna take a look at the infraspinatus. So what Tristan's gonna do right here is I'm gonna come to the back of his shoulder and about right there. So you'll notice that the most superficial structure right there is the posterior deltoid. But under that, we can see in that sort of triangular structure, see that separation right there in the middle of the screen, we can see the infraspinatus. So what I want Tristan to do is take your palm, and rotate it to the outside of your body. Yep. Rotate it out further. Oh, and relax. Now rotate it in. So, no. I mean like move your. No. Not that's a pronation right there. Move it towards the outside of your body.
Oh, so.
Yeah, like that. There you go. And now move it back in. So you can see the infra. So now we're gonna go and we're gonna take a look at the subscapularis tendon. So if we come right here and we find the head of the humerus, yeah, come down right there. So you see that bottom structure right there is the head of the humerus. If you look in the middle of the head of the humerus, you can see the biceps tendon, right? And if I come just laterally to the outside of the shoulder, right, without changing my angle too much, hopefully. There we go. We can see the, oh my gosh, what is it? Subscapularis tendon right there beside the biceps tendon. It's on the lateral aspect of our shoulder, right over here. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the serratus anterior. What I have Tristan doing right here is a motion like this, and he's going to punch forward, and we're going to see the serratus contract. If we're going based off of our origins and insertions and whatnot, we understand that that is one of the major functions of the serratus is protraction of the scapula. So if you're doing like scapular push-ups, you ever seen those? Serratus push-ups, where people will do like a push-up and then extend or like push the shoulders forward for the serratus. You know, boxers typically do this. This is the lats and the serratus are typically associated with boxers for that reason. So if I get in right here, let's see if I can find it. Push your shoulder back, Tristan. Yep. And then, so if we look at the most superficial structure there, I'm catching part of the lat because I'm in a deep part of his armpit. So I want Tristan, that's going to be the most superficial structure there. So now Tristan's going to roll his shoulder forward, and you see that contraction right there in that sort of middle area. I don't know if my hand's in frame. And then relax. And then push it forward again. And there you go. You can see the serratus working in action.